Hi again, y'all. It's T. Who else? You're on Real Talk with T. So, who else would it be? Alright, this is part 2 of the story I was just telling. If you didn't catch it, it'll be before this one, obviously. It's going to be under Real Talk T with T Ghost Stories. Simple enough. And this will be part 2. Continuing on. There were over 200 graves in this section. Many of them were neglected and uncared for, as the other relatives had been long dead before. She found a grave that was surrounded by a low wall. A small headstone indicated that the grave was Joseph Phillips, who died in 1858 at the age of 47, which was really old back then, because they caught a lot of diseases, unfortunately. How would you like to die at the age of 12 after catching a cold because somebody decided to cough on you? Remember, always cover up when you cough, please. I don't want to die, even though we have medicine for it now. But still, I wouldn't want to be that person who died because of a cold or a cough. Blech. Back to the story. If you hadn't noticed. The grave was in a shaded area, away from any light, and Lindsay was now feeling much, much more nervous than she would have liked to admit to her friends. I know people like that. Don't hide it. Let's get this over with, she muttered to herself as she checked her clock and began at the strike of the hour of midnight. She was surprised to find herself trembling with fear as she stepped on the grave, and nervously at first, and then became more and more frenzied, of beginning to jump up and down and spin all around. The bell that was still chiming had reached to as she reached to her coat pocket for Kitty's penknife, opened the blade, stooped down, and thrust it in the earth, revealing that it was nearly over. She began to rise when to her horror, she felt Joseph Phillips' fleshy, bony hand reach up from the deep earth and grip a hold of her skirt. Yee, pedophile much. Overcome with terror, she screamed, a piercing scream that only a girl in pure terror can scream. Her heart seemed to explode inside of her chest, and she collapsed across the grave. A few minutes earlier, back at the gate, her friends were startled by the distant ringing of the church clock. They stopped talking and strained their ears, listening for they didn't know what. "She'll be doing it now," whispered Kenny. The words had hardly left his lips when a dreadful, terrifying scream was heard coming from inside the graveyard. They jumped in shock and grabbed one another. "Jesus, what was that?" Kenny said. "It was Lindsay," said the other girl, dropping, who had earlier said disapproving things. The screaming stopped and they held their breath in silence that followed. "She's probably just trying to scare us." Kenny stumbled over his words nervously. "You know what she's like." But he didn't sound too convinced. They waited for any other sounds, but heard nothing. After another 15 minutes, Lindsay still hadn't returned, and one of the girls began to cry. "Something's gone wrong," she wailed. What if there was someone in there waiting for her? How could anyone know that she was going to do this? "We only decided to do it at the spur of the moment," Kenny answered. "Well, I'm not going in to find out," said one of the girls. "I'm going home." "I'm coming with you," whispered one of the boys. "Me too," added a third girl. And most of the group began to break up and move away. Kenny and one of the other boys waited for 5 more minutes, not liking the idea of leaving without Lindsay, but in the end convinced themselves that she was just playing a joke on all of them, and found another way out of the cemetery, and was probably on her way home already. Poor Lindsay. They too left the gates and headed home. Around 6:30 the following morning, lying across the grave, Lindsay's lifeless body was discovered by a gardener beginning his early shift. He immediately reported to the graveyard, who informed the police, and at the inquest that concerned anybody having listened to the testimonies given by Lindsay's friend and expert witnesses, observed that the police evidence shown that Lindsay in the dark had plunged Kenny's knife into solid earth, but unknowingly pushed the blade through the hem of her skirt. As she began to rise to her feet, the knife would have penetrated her to prevented her from standing up fully. In her nervous and anguished state, he concluded that her imagination might have led her to believe that she was being held by some supernatural force, and she might have died from fright. Talk about death by misadventure. Alright, so tell me what y'all think of that and everything. As always, like, comment, love, spread around. You can do any of that. I swear, I won't hate you for it. In fact, I will love you for it. As always, random question of the day. No matter how many videos I make, I need to ask a random question. Do cows make chocolate milk? If they could, how would they do it? Anyways, thanks. Bye. Peace. Mwah.